Good afternoon. I'm joined again today by Air Commodore Darren Webb, who will update you on the activities of the New Zealand Defence Force. Good progress has been made in aspects of our response, but recent activities have again highlighted the scale of the job ahead. Today I visited the Hawke's Bay to witness firsthand the devastation in the region and to hear directly from those on the ground what additional support they may need from government. To put it really simply, it's very rough up there. There is still no power in Napier, though every effort is being made to restore it as soon as possible. Evacuation centres are still often full with people. Some of them are there to stay, but others simply to pick up supplies or to have a meal. The Esk Valley is full of mud. It's been settling over the tops of grapevines and filling homes. There are trapped floodwaters with nowhere to go, making new lakes out of farmland and settling to destroy orchards and crops. There is still a huge way to go in this response, and there are still small communities who are cut off and isolated. Food, fuel and other supplies are now making their way in by road, air and sea. Generators have been brought in to a central point in Napier, providing power to several supermarkets and a chemist, which is allowing them to be open. Connectivity is returning, but it is patchy, and it's better in some areas than others. We know how vital connectivity is to help families get in touch with each other, and it's also helping us to get a better picture of where support is needed. I want to thank all those who may have been affected by Cyclone Gabrielle, but are still swinging into action to help those that are. Those who have not been affected but are swinging into action to help those that are. For example, the Buller Council's provided 16 Starlink units to help with the connections in Gisborne and the Hawke's Bay. Across the country, we are seeing contributions to those who need it. I saw firsthand today, though, just how much Cyclone Gabrielle is going to affect the whole country. We do need to prepare ourselves for the fact that it is going to disrupt some parts of our food supply. Things like fruit and vegetables and other goods that we're used to getting from these regions are likely to be affected. To see today just how hard people and property have been affected really did hammer home that we're going to be dealing with the effects of this cyclone for quite some time. We now know that 8 people have lost their lives as a result of the cyclone, and our emergency services continue to hold grave fears for others. Police report that there are 4,549 persons reported as uncontactable. A team of 80 people are working now to narrow down this list as quickly as possible and to prioritise contact with those who are most likely to be missing. At midday today, all rapid damage assessments for the Esk Valley had been completed. USAR has identified further areas where it will carry out rapid damage assessments and searches, and these include Pakowhai, Puketapu, Omahu and Miani. I can assure you that we're continuing to use every resource available to search for people who are missing, and a specialist team of first responders from Australia have arrived in the country this afternoon to assist with that as well. So a big thank you to our Aussie friends for helping. There's no getting away from the fact that life on the ground in the affected areas is incredibly tough, and it's going to be for some time to come. Meaningful progress is still being made across a number of areas, though. Power connections are continuing, with about 40,000 more households connected since yesterday. There are now about 62,000 without power. There's a bypass operation underway to try and get power into parts of Napier as quickly as possible. And work will continue on this overnight, and we hope that at least some parts of Napier will have power again soon. Hastings Township is now about 90% connected to electricity, which is up from around 60% yesterday. Havelock North Township is now at about 95%, which is up from about 60% yesterday. Getting cell phone towers back up and running is also a high priority, as we know that there are still many families who are worried about loved ones and can't connect. As at 4 o'clock today, Northland, Gisborne across Northland, Gisborne and the Hawke's Bay, cell tower coverage has been returned to an estimated 70% for call and text messaging. The hope is that that coverage will be restored to around 75% by tomorrow evening for call and text. Data is likely to take longer. Coverage will also be patchy in some areas as these cell towers are being largely powered by generators. As mains power comes back online, it will help us to deliver better cell phone coverage. A number of Starlink units have been deployed into areas most at need. 21 have been assigned to the Hawke's Bay, including 5 for Wairoa. And I'm glad to report that nearly every supermarket in the affected regions is up and running, with large food convoys delivering supplies yesterday and today. Fuel tankers are getting through to the affected areas now so that people will be able to fill up their cars, and many ATMs have been topped up with extra cash. Water supplies are still under pressure in many areas, and urgent work is underway in Gisborne to get safe water back to households as soon as possible, as well as other areas including Whirinaki, Wapatiki and Te Pohu. Several regions have been asking locals to conserve water, so if you are in that category, please be mindful of your water usage. Progress continues on getting roads opened. Dome Valley is now open north of Auckland, and State Highway 2 between Hastings and Napier is also open. Medical supplies are being airlifted into the areas that need them. In Ikaroa-Rāwhiti and Hastings, all GPs and pharmacies are open. The Gisborne Hospital is operating, but with very limited water supply, and the main Napier Health Centre is open and has pharmacy capacity. Wairoa has some GP and pharmacy support, and we're working to get more there for them. Health One is providing support, and they can do remote GP and nurse consultations for those who are able to access telecommunications. Responding to this cyclone and getting our communities back on their feet is going to be a big job, and it is going to take a long time. We are making progress, but I can't overstate the scale of the task that is ahead of us. We're going as far and as fast as humanly possible. We are throwing everything at it, but there is a lot to do. So to everyone helping, to our emergency services, iwi, medical professionals, supermarket and petrol station staff, roading and utility crews, truckies, and everyone to pitching in to provide support to their communities, a very big thank you. You're making a hell of a difference in an incredibly difficult set of circumstances. I'll now hand over to Air Commodore Webb and then we'll open up for questions.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Firstly, can I offer our sincere condolences to the family and colleagues of the second Fens volunteer firefighter who lost his life following the Muriwai landslip. Our thoughts are with all those mourning the loss of a loved one following Cyclone Gabrielle. The New Zealand Defence Force continues to have more than 700 personnel deployed as part of our Operation Awhina. We continue to respond to tasks assigned to us from NEMA, and today I'd like to provide a quick snapshot of what the Defence Force has been involved in the past 24 hours by region and what we're planning over the next few days. Let me start on the East Coast. HMNZS Manuanui has made its way to the Ikaroa-Rāwhiti coastal region. The ship dropped off stores and provided support to communities in Tokomaru and Tolaga Bay. The ship was today anchored off Gisborne and is conducting safety assessments prior to entering the port area. A C-130 Hercules has just departed Auckland with a further water treatment plant, and this will help restore water facilities to Gisborne, and it will arrive this evening. It will also have onboard medical supplies, including 80 oxygen bottles and electrical supply parts to assist in the reconnection of power. The LAV, or Light Armoured Vehicle road checks that I mentioned yesterday on the inland road between Murupara and Wairoa have been completed successfully. This will now allow heavy emergency vehicles to move critical supplies into these areas. The team are also identifying areas suitable for helicopters to land and bring in further supplies. Focusing in on Wairoa specifically, we can confirm the water treatment units we moved yesterday are installed and are being tested to ensure fresh water will be available to the community. Right now, NH90 helicopters are flying in vital water pump parts to help overcome the damage caused to the pipes in the region. Beyond the water support, we also have 4 Defence Force staff with communications assisting the local responders in Wairoa. Moving down to the Hawke's Bay, we can confirm that HMNZ's Te Mana has arrived in the bay. The ship has 26 tonnes of equipment on board, including food, water, fuel, shelters, clothing and electrical generators, and will complete harbour safety checks before offloading supplies. Given the scale of the destruction, the New Zealand Army has established a headquarters in Napier, and that will help focus and coordinate our efforts in the Hawke's Bay response area. We've also deployed our Mortuary Affairs Unit to Napier to support the New Zealand Police. Army engineers are preparing to support the construction of Bailey bridges, or otherwise known as temporary bridges, as requested by NEMA. A further 480 Army personnel across a variety of capabilities from Linton and Burnham stand ready to be called forward on request. These include people with skills such as builders, plumbers, electricians, caterers and transport. I'd like to acknowledge the significant role played by the Defence Force Reserve personnel. These are community-orientated people who live and work in the regions and answer the call to help when asked. Yesterday, reservists from Hawke's Bay's 5-7 battalion were able to reach a marae in Puketapu, where around 200 residents were sheltering. And they told the soldiers who delivered water, food and diesel that they were the first outsiders they had seen in days. Our 3 NH90 helicopters have been busy continuing with evacuations and transporting people and emergency supplies throughout the wider region. In terms of additional capabilities, HMNZS Canterbury has completed tasks in the sub-Antarctic islands and is now returning to New Zealand. The ship will be in Lyttelton by Saturday or tomorrow and available for movement of stores and to support to the Hawke's Bay region. Canterbury is an extremely versatile and capable ship. It can carry 33 shipping containers, 270,000 litres of water and can produce a further 70,000 litres per day. And it also has a Sea Sprite helicopter on board. With a better picture of the range of emerging tasks, we have now reached out to our colleagues in Australia to seek some additional help. At this stage, we are finalising the details but anticipate an additional aircraft and support staff will arrive early next week. This will ensure continuity of support through this period of extremely high tempo operations. As the extent of this disaster becomes obvious, again, I'd like to assure New Zealanders that your Defence Force remains committed to responding to the needs of all of the communities of New Zealand. Prime Minister.
Happy to open up for questions.
Just given the sheer scale and extent of this disaster, do we risk being overwhelmed, or are we in fact overwhelmed by it?
Look, one of the key things that we have to focus on in the next period is a good degree of prioritisation. That doesn't mean that we're not going to do things. It means that we're having to carefully think about where we deploy resources and what order we deploy them in so that we can get to the most urgent needs first. That is, I guess, essential in any emergency response, but we're likely to be doing that for a while.
And one of the issues that we're hearing on the ground is people are running out of cash. Is there anything the government can do about that cash issue, just given that EFTPOS machines are down and some people didn't even have cash when this hit? So
a lot of cash supplies have been replenished today. I'm aware that we've still got a bit of a challenge in Gisborne to make sure that we're getting cash into Gisborne, and there are some logistical arrangements, which I'm not going to share, to get a reasonably significant amount of cash into Gisborne to buy tomorrow, or at least by the end of tomorrow.
And was there anything, I guess, you sort of saw today or yesterday that was that real sort of gut punch that really sort of hammered home for you the scale of this disaster?
Look, a lot, really. I had the opportunity to speak to people who have lost their whole homes. They've lost absolutely everything. I haven't spoken directly with families of the victims, but I have spoken to people who know families of the victims, and that's incredibly challenging. I've spoken to our first responders and people who are on the ground and who have been doing sterling work and who are absolutely exhausted, but they are still going, and they're going to keep going. They are absolutely resolved to do the best job that they can possibly do. It is an extraordinary time, and we are seeing some extraordinary effort by some amazing New Zealanders.
How many remote communities do authorities know of that have yet to be made contact with?
Look, I think we've managed to make contact, whether that's regular contact or whether that's simply just a quick assessment to identify what the need is there. I think we've managed to make contact with most places. That doesn't mean that that contact is regular and ongoing yet, and it doesn't mean that necessarily we've got, an open supply line to them. But we have, the advice that I've got is that we've made contact. Having said that, our USAR teams are really essential to kind of get into some of those areas where it's difficult to assess the true need until you've actually got boots on the ground. And I think I just went through a list of some of those areas where they're now going to be focused.
And the water situation in Gisborne seems fairly dire. What can you tell us about what solutions are being explored there and how long that will take?
Yeah, I might get Air Commodore Webb to just give you an update on the logistics in terms of getting extra bits to those areas, because that's clearly a key focus at the moment.
Certainly not a water expert, but as I said, the C-130 does have the parts inbound from Auckland this afternoon and should get there tonight. My understanding is those parts are there to help restore the original infrastructure elements for the Gisborne water reticulation system. You would probably need to speak to the local council members for a better feel for how long that might take and what the testing requirements might be.
Just in relation to Craig's question for Air Commodore Webb, you've mentioned the HMNZS Canterbury. Why isn't the HMNZS Aotearoa being pressed into use? I understand it's in Devonport at the moment. It can also desalinate a lot of water. Is there any reason why that's not being used?
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right. Aotearoa, a very capable ship. Like many ships and other assets like that, they have to go through periods of routine maintenance. That ship is unfortunately at this time in one of those periods of maintenance. It wouldn't be easy or quick to release that. Fortunately, as you've heard, we've moved water in via air, via land, and Canterbury, if directed by NEBA as the highest priority for that ship, can be on site in Napier and produce significant amounts.
What aircraft will you be asking Australia to provide?
That'll be up to them primarily to go through that process. But if you're thinking about moving things in a routine around New Zealand perspective, an airlift aircraft of some description, something perhaps like another C-130 to join our fleet type.
Right, and these temporary bridges that the Defence Force engineers are going to be coming in, how many can they build, and how much of a help will that be?
We'll be providing the personnel to support Waka Kotahi and others who are bringing forward the materials themselves. I don't have the specific volume and rapidity of how fast that will take, but we'll certainly have some manpower on site and do the best we can there.
How long do those bridges last? Given the number of bridges that have been knocked out, possibly, and the staff, I imagine, will be required to rebuild them. Is it possible that these will be in place for years?
Possibly. I mean, they are a temporary arrangement. As you see in some small communities, New Zealand temporary can mean 60 years. It can mean just a few weeks. And so ideally, it would be a temporary arrangement until a more fulsome approach can be taken.
It could be years before some of those bridges are rebuilt, and if that's the case, then those temporary bridges will be the solution.
I'd probably defer to the Prime Minister.
Yeah, let's not get into that yet. We will have an opportunity to canvass that. I think at the moment the key priority is just re-establishing some physical connectivity. Obviously, some of it will be quite temporary though. Down the front. We'll come down the front and we go way back.
Water issues. Have you been briefed on what caused those breaks in the main supply line?
It's quite a long supply line between where the water is collected and stored and where it is used. I think something like 40 or 50 kilometres, and there's been extensive damage along that route, including some of the bridges that the water travelled over have been washed out completely. There are a number of break points there, which it's going to take them some time to repair that. They'll be looking at what they can do as a temporary measure or other alternatives there. They've got some ideas. They're working really fast to try and get as much water back on as they can.
In terms of the bigger picture, does this kind of raise bigger questions about climate resilience and having a supply line that critical going through such a vulnerable area? Surely that raises questions.
Yeah, look, I think we can all agree that it's highlighted some weaknesses in our overall resilience to natural disasters that we're going to have to really grapple with. The key focus right now is just to overcome those as quickly as possible. But as we look to rebuild, we're going to have to think carefully about what we rebuild and how we rebuild it so that we're rebuilding in a more resilient way.
Minister,
Ben.
on the death toll, I understand you don't want to talk about them until they're confirmed, completely get it. But do you need to level with New Zealand as to the scale of the tragedy that's sort of unfolding here in a less sort of precise way?
The thing is, we don't know. We're not talking huge numbers, so it's not like I'm aware that there are lots and lots and lots out there that we're not reporting. We're still picking up this at one or two at a time. It is not, and we will share that information as soon as we're able to.
On the Esk Valley as well, you said rapid assessment has been done. Can you report what they've found at all? Do we know what
So that rapid assessment basically means going door to door, house by house, building by building, to check to make sure that there are no people still in them. And so they've completed that work. Those who've seen some of this in the past, I've seen some of the photos of it today. The houses get spray painted to identify that they have been cleared. They go through and they do that building by building. So they've completed that work in the Esk Valley and they're now moving on to other areas.
Stuart Nash says you'll have to really consider whether it's appropriate for anyone to build there in the future. Do you agree with that?
Look, I think it's going to be some time before we're even at that point. If you look at the levels of dirt and silt that have built up there, a lot of the infrastructure that was there, a lot of what was there before has been buried. So, we're talking some big conversations to be held yet. But I just want to be really respectful and mindful that these are people's lives, livelihoods and homes that we're talking about. I'll come up to that, yeah.
You mentioned the mortuary unit that you're providing to support police. Could you just give some more detail on that and why it's needed?
Yeah, it's a normal capability that we have, and we certainly are prepared to support police lead, again, at the request of NEMA. For us, it's a small group of personnel and the equipment, and we'll just set that up in the port area of Napier.
Has there been any further thought given to a wage subsidy of sorts to people who have been in affected areas?
The Minister of Finance and I will be having conversations over the weekend just about some immediate steps that we might take to provide additional support, and then what we do over a longer period of time. Obviously, our focus in the last 48 hours has just been, the last 5 days really, has just been on that immediate response. But we're certainly mindful that we're going to need to support people to get their lives back on track, and we're going to need to support businesses to get up and running again. I don't want to put a particular parameters around what that may or may not involve yet. We've got to work through that.
Sorry, just one more. Just as you're saying, that because how protracted the response is going to be, is it likely that we're going to need to shift, essentially even temporarily, communities, like relocate them to other parts of New Zealand because it just doesn't exist anymore where they were?
Well, some of that's happened already, just by the weather. That there are some places that are uninhabitable at the moment, and whether or not people are able to return, it's too soon to speculate on that right at this point.
Can you, sorry, just to sort of follow on, Amelia, can you sort of talk to what options are on the table for rehousing?
In terms of rehousing, our focus right now is to get a roof over people's heads who have been displaced. Some of that is quite temporary, so some of it is people living in halls and in temporary accommodation and schools. We clearly cannot sustain that for a long period. It wouldn't be right for those people. So once we get through identifying how many of those people can return home, we'll then know exactly how many people we're working with to try and find more permanent temporary accommodation, if that makes sense, for them. And we will do whatever we need to do there. So we'll work with other accommodation providers, including hotels, motels, landlords. We'll try and find ways to accommodate people.
And it could sort of be moving people around the country, or could you be building more places, things like that, like prefabbs?
We're certainly going to be building places, but I don't want to speculate about exactly where we're going to be building them, but where we're going to need to build places. And of course, there'll be a lot of private sector work in that area too, because there'll be a lot of need to rebuild homes.
What's the updated displaced number, if that's okay?
Sorry, I haven't got that. Yeah.
We're talking about numbers of uncontactable people. How many people do you have serious concerns about?
The police haven't put a number on that yet. Now, as I've said, I went through, I think I gave you the number, I can do that again, of just the number of people that police kind of have registered, and they're going through and identifying, so it's 4,549 people who have been registered as uncontactable. In many cases, that will simply be, they will be alive and well and fine, it's just no one's been able to contact them. So they're working through a process of trying to identify as many of them as possible. In that process, they identify the ones that they have more serious concern about. They haven't given me a more specific number other than the fact that there are several people that they are very concerned about.
And this morning you described it as the worst natural disaster in this century. Does that mean it's going to be worse than Christchurch, where it cost 40 billion, 196 people died? Is that where we should be looking
It certainly covers a much larger area. Geographically. I don't want to get into a comparison with Christchurch. I don't think that's fair on the people of Christchurch or the people who are involved in this activity at the moment. But clearly, in terms of a weather-related event, it's the largest that we have seen in a very, very long time.
So just briefly on that question, have you now removed duplicates? Have officials removed duplicates from that list of uncontactable people? And if not, what's the problem there? Why is it?
Well, my understanding is that yes, they have removed the duplicates, but it is still a dynamic list, so people are being added to and removed from that list all of the time. Yeah.
In terms of the effect on the food supply chains, are you keeping an eye on, I mean, you've passed regulation of the grocery sector, keeping an eye on concerns around price gouging and potential issues around adding margin to take advantage of this?
Yes, and we've got some pretty good mechanisms that were set up during the COVID-19 response to keep an eye on price gouging. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment are certainly monitoring that very closely, as they did during COVID-19.
Can you give us more of a sense of what the disruption will actually be?
Well, look, it's difficult to put a number on that. What I can tell you is what I saw. So I saw a lot of food-producing areas covered in an awful lot of mud, and I suspect that means a lot of those crops will be unusable. The true extent of that is hard to gauge at this point. There's a lot of fruit that's already been knocked down before picking season and is, may well be unsalvageable. I think we just have to prepare for the fact that we're talking about one of New Zealand's major food baskets, and the extent of the damage is very significant, right at a time when they would be gearing up for harvesting. So we won't know the true extent of that. I want to acknowledge too that the farming community in Fonterra in particular have got a very proactive effort around animal welfare. So they've had helicopters flying over the area to assess, to make sure they're dealing with immediate animal welfare issues. But again, disruption there too.
What conversations, if any, have ministers had so far with insurance companies around processing of claims, etc.?
Yeah, so the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs have been leading that work. Because I have been out of cell phone coverage for most of the day, I haven't spoken to them today, but there certainly have been conversations, and we'll aim to get you an update on that in the next day or two.
The Minister of Finance made a speech today and mentioned a figure of about $1 billion in terms of the damage from the Auckland floods to McAnulty infrastructure, and a massive amount of money. Have you had any indication from the Minister of Transport from McAnulty that you'll need to help the Transport Agency with a Crown injection to cover the cost of these floods?
I think we can safely assume that we are going to need to put an infrastructure, an injection of funding into infrastructure, transport being core amongst those. Including rail as well. I mean, I saw some of the damage to rail. Large sections of rail have just disappeared. They have been completely washed out. And they are quite an essential supply line as well. So we are going to undoubtedly have to put money into infrastructure. The true extent of that, we still don't know yet. Some of the assessments of bridges, for example, haven't been finished yet, so we won't know the damage of whether they can be remediated or whether they are going to need to be demolished and completely rebuilt. Look, we'll get into that in due course, but I'm not going to start writing the budget here right now.
So yesterday to take sort of flood-related actions. When's too soon to get it on the actual cabinet agenda?
It'll be a rolling maul, I suspect. We will have a good conversation about it on Monday, and that'll include some further early steps that we might take. Again, we'll be working over the weekend to shape that up so that we can have some early decisions potentially on some things on Monday. But I don't want to say that Monday's suddenly going to be the day where we make big announcements. It's still going to be that kind of progressive, let's just deal with what's immediately in front of us first. But there's a lot of work already going into the rebuild, even before we get to that point, planning for it and making sure that we've got that lined up.
What about Parliament next week? Do you anticipate it's too soon to go back after a big crisis?
Look, I just want to respond to one or two of the comments that I've seen about that. Democracy hasn't been suspended because Parliament hasn't been meeting. Parliament doesn't meet in the weekends, and we regularly adjourn for weeks at a time, and democracy continues to prevail in this country. We'll get Parliament back up and running as soon as possible, though, because I'm aware that there's an important accountability function that still needs to be served by Parliament meeting. I think if we're in a position to meet next week, I would certainly like to do that, and we may well be in a position to be able to do that. That's certainly the current plan. The current plan is for Parliament to meet again on Tuesday. That was what was agreed last week. It would take a lot for me to back away from that. I think we made a commitment to do that. But I just want to reassure people that we haven't suspended democracy in any way. We're still a democratic country.
The Pacific Island Forum Special Leaders Retreat is next week as well. Has this disaster affected whether New Zealand will attend?
I haven't made a call on that yet. New Zealand will be there in one capacity or another, but whether I travel or not, I'll make a call on that probably early next week, depending on how much progress we can make in the next few days.
Just back on the housing question. And so you're looking at sending in like Watercom or sort of shipping containers as options for housing, or is that being requested, or is that sort of on?
Look, I wouldn't take any options off the table at this point, but clearly we've got a little bit more to do before we're in a position to start making decisions about standing up new accommodation. At this point, it's just about getting people to have a roof over their heads.
Have you had to significantly rewrite your opening Prime Minister's statement, and you know, is the rest of your sort of agenda, your reprioritisation agenda, and the rest of the things that you'd plan?
It'd be fair to say I'll be taking another look at it over the weekend. Last couple of questions, yeah.
She's obviously like the model in crisis management.
She sent me a few messages of support, but we haven't really spoken in any great depth.
So yesterday, briefings on any major damage to schools on the East Coast, and what happens to the children who have been displaced? You know, is their education just essentially on hold?
We know that we've got connectivity issues with some of our schools, so some of them still got power out, clearly, but we also know that there's some internet connectivity issues as well. Schools, of course, can resume even without the internet connected, though. But I haven't received any briefings on the physical damage to schools, but we'll know more by Monday. So the advice on school attendance is the same as it has been all week, which is just follow the advice of the schools. Schools will be making decisions about when they reopen and when they don't. Clearly, where there's still significant disruption, they won't be reopening, but they'll communicate with their parents about that. Last couple of questions. You haven't had many. Yeah.
So yesterday, it seemed like it was a thanks but no thanks to the Australians on extra help, apart from those search and rescue additions as well. But today it is yes please. So what changed over that 24 hours?
I wouldn't agree with your characterisation of the comments that either of us made yesterday. I think what we said was that we'll continue to keep that under review, and that where it's appropriate to accept offers of international help, particularly from the Australians because they're the closest, then we'll take up those offers. Clearly it's something that we're reviewing on an hour by hour, day by day basis.
So what changed over that 24 hours then?
I think the key point there really was giving the time required to get a good feel for exactly what we're going to be needing. So, as I said yesterday, that was the period we'd identified to do that work, and today we've concluded that.
Have we lost anything in delay?
I don't believe so. All tasks that we've been requested to achieve have been done, and as the Prime Minister mentioned, we'll just continue to assess that. We've had obviously offers from partners and allies, and if there's a good reason to reach out and ask for more help, that's exactly what we'll do.
All right, we might wrap up there. I'll let you guys have the last two questions, and then we will wrap up.
I was just going to ask, it's the second disaster for you in under a month in the job. How are the energy levels?
Pretty good. Thank you, though. Thank you for your concern for my welfare. Yep.
Just now that connectivity's upticking, or getting a bit better, what are the sort of number one concerns, and how much of a factor, or how concerned are you over hygiene?
Yeah, look, and I'm aware that there'll be an issue. One of the conversations that I was having today, for example, is about getting landfills reopened, because if you think about people in Napier, for example, they'll have a lot of food that needs to be disposed of. People who had deep freezers and so on, after 5 days with no power, they'll be getting to the point where they have to clean those out. So that is very much front of mind for our emergency response teams, to make sure that waste management is at the fore in the next few days. Thanks, everybody.